There's just something about getting right to the heart of things, and that's what we're doing today, going straight to the source.
Yeah, we're talking about the KJV.
Exactly. We're going to be taking a deep dive into one of the most thought-provoking books in the King James Version, and I'm really excited about this one.
Me too. And we're going to be unpacking the Book of Amos.
Amos, and we're going to do it in a way that's, easy to understand.
That's right. You don't have to be a biblical scholar or, a theologian to get something out of this.
Right. Just kind of like a regular person, just looking for some insight.
Absolutely. We're going to break down the historical context, the key themes, the structure of the book.
Everything you kind of need to know to get started.
Exactly. The essential nuggets.
Yeah. And it's so important to remember as we start that, we're not just talking about some ancient text dropped out of the blue.
Oh, no.
This book comes from a specific place and time
with
its own unique set of circumstances.
A real historical moment.
Exactly. Okay, so let's first get to know the man behind these powerful words.
All right.
Amos himself.
Amos the prophet.
The prophet.
Well, he came from Tekoa, which was a relatively small town in Judah, about 6 miles south of Bethlehem and 11 miles from Jerusalem.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting right off the bat is that he wasn't connected to the royal court like Isaiah was, nor was he from a priestly lineage like Jeremiah or Ezekiel.
Interesting. So no palace connections or, religious establishment ties.
Right.
Just kind of an outsider.
Kind of a man of the people, a working man. He tended flocks and cultivated sycamore fig groves.
So really getting his hands dirty.
That's right. Now there's some debate in the sources whether he actually owned these himself or was a hired hand. But, that's kind of a subtle point.
Right.
What really strikes you when you read Amos is this incredible command of language he has and his surprisingly broad knowledge of the world.
Yeah.
So it suggests to us that he wasn't, a simple uneducated farmer.
Right. It takes a certain kind of person to craft these words and deliver them with such impact.
Absolutely. And get this, even though he was from the southern kingdom of Judah,
okay,
his primary mission was to deliver his pathetic message to the northern kingdom of Israel.
Wow. So he's going into essentially enemy territory.
That's right.
With this really powerful message.
Yeah, imagine the courage that must have taken.
Absolutely. And it seems that his main stage for this mission was Bethel.
Yes, Bethel, a very significant religious center in Israel.
So why was Bethel so important?
Well, for our listeners who might not remember, King Jeroboam I had established worship there, complete with golden calves. You can read about that in 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 28 to 30.
Wow, so this was a place that, was central to the religious life of the northern kingdom, but also kind of controversial.
Very much so, because it was set up as an alternative to the temple in Jerusalem.
Right, and their worship had also taken on elements from the surrounding cultures.
Yes, it wasn't purely focused on Yahweh.
So Amos is speaking truth to power, right in the heart of their religious system.
Absolutely, he's not holding back.
No, he's not. And the book itself, it's not just a random collection of things that Amos said, right?
No, the Book of Amos appears to be a carefully organized collection of his prophecies.
Like a cohesive whole?
Right, although the exact chronological order of his spoken messages isn't entirely clear. He may have, repeated certain pronouncements at different times.
Right, like a message so vital it needed to be said again and again.
And maybe even refined for different audiences.
Okay.
And while his initial focus was certainly on the northern kingdom, the book ultimately addresses all of Israel.
That's why we see those references to Judah and Jerusalem in there as well.
Exactly. It's a message for the whole nation.
So we have Amos, this man with humble roots, but a powerful message.
Right.
Aimed at a society that's prosperous, but deeply flawed.
A society on the brink.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really crucial question for understanding the book. When exactly was he delivering these pronouncements? What's the specific historical context that we need to keep in mind?
Well, Amos prophesied during a very specific period overlapping the reigns of two kings, Uzziah and Judah. He ranged from 792 to 740 BC, and Jeroboam II in Israel, his time on the throne was from 793 to 753 BC.
Okay.
And his core ministry seems to have been around 760 to 750 BC.
So right in the middle of those reigns.
Exactly.
And this wasn't a time of, struggle for either of these kingdoms.
No, not at all. Actually, quite the opposite.
Really?
Both Judah and Israel were experiencing a period of significant wealth and had achieved considerable political and military success.
Wow, so on the surface, things looked pretty good.
They did. You can find details supporting this in 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 through 15:7. As well as in 2 Chronicles chapter 26.
So they had all this outward success, but it sounds like that was masking some serious internal problems.
Yes, beneath that veneer of prosperity, both kingdoms were riddled with some very serious issues, widespread idolatry, for one.
So their worship was kind of a mixed bag.
A blend of following Yahweh and following, local pagan practices.
Yeah, right.
And then there was this extravagant and excessive lifestyle, particularly among the wealthy,
Okay.
widespread immorality, a corrupt justice system,
Mm.
and a blatant disregard for the poor and oppression of the poor.
So these are the very things that Amos is going to be railing against.
Precisely, these are the issues that are really at the heart of his message.
And these internal problems, they had some pretty significant external consequences looming, right?
They absolutely did as a direct result of their unfaithfulness, and these injustices God would ultimately bring about the Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom.
And that happened between 722 and 721 BC?
That's right. Amos's prophecies serve as a very clear warning of this impending disaster.
It's really striking, this sense of, false security that the people of Israel seem to have had at this time.
Right? They felt safe.
Like everything was fine.
Politically secure.
Yeah, even spiritually self-assured.
They had this kind of spiritual complacency.
Where do you think that came from?
Well, there were a few factors at play. See, about 40 years prior to this, the prophet Elisha had prophesied a resurgence of Israel's power. We see that in 2 Kings 13, 17-19.
Okay.
And then more recently, the prophet Jonah had even prophesied their restoration to a level of glory reminiscent of King Solomon's reign.
Wow.
That's detailed in 2 Kings 14:25.
So they had these past assurances that seemed to suggest that God was, firmly on their side.
Yeah, but, past favor can breed present blindness.
Right. They were mistaking temporary prosperity for God's permanent approval.
Exactly. They forgot that blessings come with responsibilities.
Right. So these earlier prophecies of success, they actually lulled them into a dangerous sense of complacency.
That's right. It's almost like they thought they had this free pass no matter how they behaved.
Like they could just do whatever they wanted.
And the irony is that the very prosperity they enjoyed actually fueled their religious and moral decline.
That's fascinating and tragic.
It's a timeless warning.
They seem to have forgotten the lessons from past divine punishments.
Yes, and as Amos was sent to declare, God's patience was finally reaching its limit.
Right. So enter Amos
Here comes Amos the prophet.
with a message that they really didn't want to hear.
A hard message, but a necessary one.
And Amos's arrival marks a really important point in the history of prophecy, doesn't it?
It is with Amos we see the beginnings of prophetic messages being intentionally written down and preserved
Interesting.
to guide Israel through the coming catastrophe and offer hope beyond it.
So these books, these prophetic books, were meant to be more than just spoken words.
They were.
They were meant to endure.
That's right. And it's worth noting that Amos was a contemporary of both Hosea and Jonah.
Right. So this marks a pivotal era in how God was communicating with his people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a good grasp of who Amos was and when he was speaking. Now let's get to the heart of his message, the what.
Okay.
What are the key theological themes that really stand out in the book of Amos?
The central theological theme, without a doubt, is social justice.
Social justice.
Yes, as powerfully expressed in Amos chapter 5, verse 24. But let judgment run down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream.
That's a beautiful image.
It is, isn't it?
Like justice isn't just a trickle, it's meant to be an unstoppable force.
That's right. And Amos isn't just saying, be nice to each other. He's saying that true worship, genuine piety, is inseparable from living justly and righteously.
It's like saying you can't love God and ignore the suffering of others.
Exactly. You can't compartmentalize your faith.
Right. And the sources highlight a contrast between Amos and another prophet at the time, Hosea, in terms of their main focus.
Yes. While Amos passionately emphasized God's justice and righteousness, Hosea's primary focus was on God's love, grace, mercy, and forgiveness.
So they offer complementary perspectives on God's character.
They do two sides of the same coin.
And Amos is the one delivering the tough message,
The hard truth.
clearly announcing God's impending judgment on Israel because of their unfaithfulness.
Right? Despite their unique relationship with God, remember the Exodus, the entry into the Promised Land, the covenants with David and Solomon?
Right, the whole story.
The Israelites consistently failed to uphold their part of the covenant.
And it wasn't just their treatment of each other that was the problem. Their actual religious practices were also under scrutiny, weren't they?
Absolutely. The religious sites at Bethel and elsewhere had become corrupted. They were blending true worship with pagan elements.
So a syncretism of sorts.
Yes, and Israel had developed this superficial, almost transactional understanding of the rituals God had prescribed.
Like going through the motions without any real heart commitment?
That's right. They mistakenly believed that simply performing these acts was enough to satisfy God.
Like checking boxes.
Exactly, and that somehow this allowed them to behave however they wished in their daily lives, a very flawed and very pagan idea.
So this gap between their religious practices and their actual lives, this had serious consequences.
It did. Without a genuine commitment to God's law, there was no real foundation for ethical behavior.
And Amos strongly condemns those who gained power and wealth by exploiting others.
Yes, he calls out those with multiple luxurious homes, expensive furniture tables laden with riches acquired through dishonesty, injustice, and the oppression of the poor.
We see that in passages like Amos chapter 3, verse 15.
Right?
And the consequences for this weren't just a slap on the wrist, right? Amos is talking about something far more significant.
Oh yes, God's coming judgment wasn't just a warning, as had been the case in some earlier instances mentioned in chapter 4, verses 6 to 11. This was to be a near total devastation.
Wow, a complete upheaval.
The unthinkable was going to happen. God would use a foreign pagan nation to uproot his chosen people.
That's a really sobering message, but within all this pronouncement of doom, is there any hint of hope?
There is a conditional hope. Amos suggests that if they were to truly repent and seek good, the Lord might show mercy to a remnant.
Okay, so there's a possibility of redemption.
There is. We see this in passages like 5:15 and the calls to seek good in 5:4-6 and 5:14.
Even amidst the strong warnings, there's an invitation to turn back.
There is a glimmer of light in the darkness.
And the vision doesn't end solely with judgment, does it? There's this promise of a future restoration.
Indeed, beyond the immediate judgment, Amos prophesies a glorious future. This includes the restoration of the line of David, with his descendants ruling over many nations, as highlighted in 9:11 and 12.
Okay.
And there's also the promise of Israel being brought back to their land, where they will experience security and abundance, as described in 9:13-15.
So even in the face of severe judgment, God's ultimate plan for his people involves renewal and blessing.
That's right, judgment is never the final word.
And Amos's understanding of God isn't limited to just the nation of Israel, is it?
No, absolutely not. The God for whom Amos speaks isn't just the God of Israel. He's the Lord of all history and the entire cosmos.
He's bigger than just one nation.
He is passages like 4:13, 5:8, and 9, 5, and 6 emphasize his universal power and authority.
So his concerns extend far beyond the borders of Israel.
Absolutely. And he even uses other nations to accomplish his purposes, as mentioned in 6:14.
So this is a reminder that Israel's special relationship with God came with significant responsibilities.
It wasn't a license for complacency or injustice.
And the story of Jonah provides another good example of God's concern for other nations as well.
Right. Israel had a unique covenant with God, but that didn't make them exempt from his standards of justice, nor did it mean he was indifferent to the rest of the world.
It's like he's holding them to a higher standard because they've been given more.
Exactly. To whom much is given, much is required.
Okay, this gives us a really solid understanding of the book's core message now to help us navigate through it if we want to read it ourselves. Can you give us a structured overview? What's the basic outline of the Book of Amos?
Certainly, the book begins with a superscription, in one introducing the prophet and the time of his ministry.
Okay.
Then we have an introduction to Amos's overall message in 1:2.
Setting the stage.
Yes, and then we have a significant section of Oracle's pronouncements of judgment
Okay.
against various nations surrounding Israel, including Aram, Philistia, Phoenicia, Edom, Ammon, Moab, and even Judah itself.
Interesting. So the judgment isn't solely focused on Israel right away. The surrounding nations are also held accountable.
That's right. It emphasizes the universal scope of God's justice. This section spans from 1:3 to 2:16.
So he's really casting a wide net here.
He is. And then following these oracles against the nations, we have specific oracles directed squarely at Israel,
Okay.
focusing on their ruthless oppression of the poor, their corrupt religious practices, the contrast between their privileged status and their sinful actions, and the clear announcement of the coming destruction. This section runs from 2:6 to 2:16, overlapping slightly with the previous section, but really honing in on Israel's specific sins.
Okay, so it's like zooming in from the bigger picture to focus specifically on Israel.
Exactly.
And then the book continues with further oracles specifically aimed at Israel, delving deeper into the different facets of their sin and the impending judgment.
That's right. From 3:1 to 5:17, we have these detailed announcements and justifications for the judgment,
Okay.
specifically targeting the wealthy elite and their perversion of religion, highlighting their widespread injustices and foretelling how their current prosperity will be turned into deep mourning.
Wow. A real reversal of fortune.
Yes, and then we move into what are essentially announcements of exile, which must have been a terrifying prospect for the people in Israel to hear.
Yeah, exile was like the ultimate punishment.
It was in 5:18 to 6:14. Amos delivers messages of woe, particularly against Israel's distorted understanding of their religious practices and their arrogant pride.
So he's really condemning their hypocrisy.
He is culminating in a solemn declaration of judgment upon the proud and unjust nation.
Okay, and then the structure shifts, doesn't it? It moves to a series of vivid visions depicting divine retribution.
Yes, this section from 7:1 to 9:10 includes a sequence of powerful visions.
Like watching a film?
Almost in the first two, concerning locusts and fire, Amos actually intercedes.
He tries to stop it.
He does, and the judgment is initially averted.
Wow.
But the subsequent visions, the plumb line which symbolizes God's perfect standard of righteousness against which Israel is found to be crooked.
Crooked, interesting.
The confrontation between Amos and the priest Amaziah at Bethel, the basket of ripe fruit, signifying that Israel is ripe for judgment, and finally the Lord standing by the altar indicating inescapable judgment, all point towards the inevitability of God's justice.
So those initial reprieves, they were just temporary?
They were God's patience had its limits.
These images are so powerful, it really underscores the seriousness and the certainty of the coming judgment.
Yes, judgment is not something to be taken lightly.
And then finally, the book concludes with this message of hope and ultimate restoration.
It does. The concluding section from 9:11 to 15 offers a hopeful glimpse into Israel's future, including the restoration of David's dynasty and their return to a fruitful and secure promised land reminiscent of Eden.
So a return to paradise.
In the sense.
The Book of Amos takes us on this incredible journey from condemnation of injustice to a promise of future hope.
Yes.
All centered around this crucial theme of social justice as the true expression of faith. To bring our deep dive to a close, what are the key insights you would want our listeners to take away from our exploration of Amos?
The fundamental message is this unbreakable connection between genuine worship and the practice of social justice. Amos makes it clear that outward religious rituals are meaningless, even offensive to God, if they're not accompanied by a sincere commitment to righteousness and fairness in how we treat one another.
It's about aligning our actions with our beliefs.
Exactly. And we've also seen how a period of great material success can paradoxically lead to moral and spiritual decay with severe consequences.
So prosperity isn't always a good thing.
Not when it leads to complacency and forgetfulness of God.
Right, right.
The book serves as a stark and timeless reminder of God's unwavering commitment to justice and his deep concern for the well-being of all people.
It's a message that feels incredibly relevant even today.
It does, doesn't it?
Especially considering, everything that's going on in the world.
Considering Amos's unwavering focus on justice and righteousness, it really prompts us to ask ourselves some hard questions. How do we actively ensure that our own expressions of faith authentically align with a real commitment to justice and righteousness in our daily lives and in the broader communities we are part of?
Right. Are we living out our faith or just talking about it?
Exactly. Or perhaps what contemporary forms of societal complacency and moral compromise might echo Amos's sharp critiques of ancient Israel? It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is. It really gives you a lot to chew on.
The Book of Amos, though, written thousands of years ago, continues to challenge us to examine our own hearts and the societies we live in, urging us toward a faith that is both deeply personal and profoundly concerned with justice for all.
Absolutely. So we encourage you, dear listeners, to delve into the Book of Amos further and consider its enduring significance for your own life.
It's a book that speaks across the centuries.
It really does. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.